Princess Zarathel stood at the massive viewing port of her father's flagship, watching the small blue planet grow larger as they approached. Earth, such an unremarkable world from space. Yet somehow these humans had managed to hold back the Kethmaran Empire for 3 standard cycles. Her crystalline skin shimmered with nervous energy, creating patterns of silver and gold that betrayed her inner turmoil. "You understand your duty, daughter," Emperor Vextar's voice rumbled behind her, each word carrying the weight of absolute authority. His massive form cast a shadow that seemed to darken the entire observation deck. "This marriage alliance will secure peace between our peoples. The humans have proven surprisingly resilient." Zarathel touched the ceremonial binding chains at her throat, each link forged from pure nexium, the rarest metal in the galaxy. According to tradition, only her chosen mate could remove them, symbolizing the unbreaking bond between their peoples. "I know, Father, but why do they insist on such a simple ceremony? Our intelligence reports suggest their leader barely understands basic galactic protocols." The Emperor's laugh was like grinding stone. "Perhaps that is why they have survived where others have not. They do not think as we do." He moved to stand beside her, his 4 arms clasped behind his back. "The human they call Marcus Chun defeated Admiral Krovek in single combat. No species has accomplished such a feat in over 1,000 years." Zarathel had heard the stories, but dismissed them as propaganda. Admiral Krovek was enhanced with military-grade cybernetics, stood 12 feet tall, and possessed enough raw strength to crush starship hulls with his bare hands. The idea that a human, a species that averaged barely 6 feet in height and possessed no natural weapons, could defeat him seemed impossible. "He must have used some kind of technology," she murmured, more to herself than to her father. "That is what we all assumed," the Emperor replied, "until we saw the surveillance footage." The ship's AI announced their arrival in Earth's solar system, and Zarathel felt her stomach tighten. In 6 hours, she would be married to a complete stranger from an alien species, binding 2 civilizations together in an alliance that would either bring lasting peace or devastating war. The human delegation met them at Luna Station, humanity's primary spaceport. Zarathel was surprised by how ordinary they looked. She had expected something more intimidating from a species that had held back the Empire's advance. The humans were small, soft-looking creatures with pale skin and strange hair that seemed to serve no protective purpose. Their leader, her future husband, was even more underwhelming than she had imagined. Marcus Chun appeared to be in his early 30s by human standards, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to take in everything around him with quiet intensity. He was tall for a human, but still stood nearly 2 feet shorter than Zarathel. When he greeted her father, his voice was calm and respectful, showing none of the arrogance or fear she had expected. "Emperor Vextar," Marcus said, offering what she learned was called a bow, a human gesture of respect. "We are honored by your presence and grateful for this opportunity to formalize peace between our peoples." Her father studied the human with obvious skepticism. "You are the one they call the Kethmoran Slayer?" Marcus's expression didn't change. "I'm the one who fought Admiral Krovek, yes. Though I prefer my name to titles." "Show me," the Emperor commanded suddenly. "Show me the strength that defeated my finest admiral." The request caught everyone off guard. Human diplomats began whispering urgently among themselves, while Kethmoran officers moved their hands closer to their weapons. Zarathel felt her hearts racing, both of them, as her dual cardiovascular system responded to stress. Marcus remained perfectly calm. "With respect, Your Majesty, this is neither the time nor the place for demonstrations of strength. We are here to celebrate peace, not to relitigate past conflicts." "You refuse." The Emperor's voice carried a dangerous edge that had preceded the destruction of entire worlds. "I suggest we focus on the future rather than the past," Marcus replied evenly. "But if you insist on understanding what happened with Admiral Krovek, I would be happy to explain after the ceremony." The tension in the air was thick enough to cut. Zarathel realized this could be the moment that determined whether her sacrifice would bring peace or merely delay an inevitable war. She stepped forward, drawing on every lesson in diplomacy her tutors had drilled into her. "Perhaps," she said carefully, "we might postpone such discussions until after Marcus, and I have had time to know each other better. As his future wife, I would be interested to learn about his capabilities in a more appropriate setting." Both leaders looked at her, and she saw something flicker in Marcus's eyes. Gratitude? Amusement? It was gone too quickly to interpret. But her father nodded slowly, apparently satisfied with her intervention. The wedding ceremony was conducted according to human customs, which struck Zarathel as remarkably simple compared to the elaborate Kethmoran rituals she had expected. There were no blood oaths, no ritual combats, no ceremonial exchanges of warrior trophies. Instead, Marcus and she simply spoke words of commitment to each other while their respective delegations watched. When Marcus was asked to remove her binding chains, a gesture that required considerable strength even for a Kethmoran, Zarathel held her breath. The chains were designed to be nearly indestructible, removable only by someone with extraordinary physical power or the proper ceremonial tools. Marcus examined the chains briefly, his fingers tracing the intricate links with what seemed like casual interest. Then, without any visible effort, he grasped the primary clasp and simply opened it. The chains fell away as easily as if they had been made of paper. The silence that followed was deafening. Zarathel stared at her new husband in shock. Those chains had been forged by the Empire's finest craftsmen using techniques passed down for generations. Even with proper tools, removing them should have required significant effort. "Thank you," she whispered, unsure what else to say. Marcus smiled at her, the first genuine expression she had seen from him. "You're welcome, Princess. I hope this is the beginning of a friendship between us as well as between our peoples." The reception that followed was awkward, but peaceful. Human and Kethmoran delegates made stilted conversation while carefully avoiding any topics that might reignite old hostilities. Zarathel found herself watching Marcus throughout the evening, trying to understand what she had gotten herself into. He moved with an economy of motion that reminded her of the Empire's most elite warriors, yet he seemed completely relaxed and unthreatening. When younger human diplomats approached him with obvious reverence, he treated them with patience and humor. When Kethmoran officers studied him with barely concealed hostility, he remained courteous and unperturbed. "You are wondering about me," he said quietly, appearing beside her as she stood alone on an observation balcony overlooking Earth. Zarathel nodded. "I confess I am. The stories about you, they seem impossible. What seems impossible to one species often seems natural to another," Marcus replied. "Your people value strength and honor in battle. Mine values adaptability and perseverance. Perhaps that explains some of the confusion." Admiral Krovek was enhanced with military-grade cybernetics, she pressed. He could bend starship hull plates with his bare hands. "How did you defeat him?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the stars. "Your admiral was very strong," he finally said. "But strength alone doesn't determine the outcome of a fight. He had advantages in raw power, reach, and weapons. But he also had disadvantages, such as he was used to winning through intimidation and overwhelming force. When that didn't work, he didn't have a backup plan." Marcus glanced at her, and she saw something in his eyes that made her step back instinctively. It wasn't anger or aggression. It was something much more unsettling. It was the look of a predator that had learned to hide among prey. "You're afraid of me now," he observed without accusation. "Should I be?" "That depends," Marcus said. "Are you planning to attack humanity or harm innocent people?" "Of course not. I'm here to secure peace." "Then, you have nothing to fear from me." His expression softened back to the mild, pleasant demeanor he had shown throughout the day. "I'm sorry if I startled you. Most humans learn early to moderate certain aspects of our nature when dealing with other species. It makes diplomacy easier." Before Zarathel could ask what he meant by that, Her father's voice boomed across the reception area. It is time for the final ceremony. The final ceremony turned out to be another human tradition, something called a first dance, where the newly married couple performed a ritualized movement sequence while their guests watched. Zarathel had learned the basic steps, though the concept of recreational synchronized movement was foreign to her culture. As Marcus took her hand and led her to the center of the room, she realized this was the first time they had actually touched. His skin was warm, much warmer than she had expected, and his grip was gentle but unmistakably strong. When the music began, a slow, melodic human composition, he guided her through the movements with surprising grace. "You dance well for a warrior," she commented. "You assume all humans are warriors," he replied. "We're not. Most of us are farmers, teachers, engineers, artists. We only fight when we have to." "Then why are you so good at it?" Marcus spun her slowly, and when she came back into his arms, his expression was thoughtful. "Because when we do have to fight, we fight to win. And we've had a lot of practice at surviving things that shouldn't be survivable." The dance ended to polite applause, and the reception gradually wound down. As the various delegations began departing for their ships, Zarathel found herself alone with her new husband in the quarters that had been prepared for them aboard the human station. The rooms were comfortable but modest by royal standards, functional furniture, simple decorations, and a large viewing port that looked out at the star field. Nothing like the opulent chambers she was accustomed to in the imperial palace. "I can request more elaborate accommodations if you prefer," Marcus offered, noticing her examination of the space. "This is fine," she assured him. "I was just observing. Your people seem to prefer simplicity." "We tend to focus on function over form," he agreed. "Though I suspect you'll find Earth itself more varied than this station might suggest." An uncomfortable silence fell between them. Zarathel realized she had no idea how to proceed. Kethmoran marriages were primarily political and economic arrangements, with personal compatibility being a secondary concern. She had no experience with the emotional expectations humans might have for such a relationship. "I should clarify something," Marcus said, seeming to sense her uncertainty. "I know this marriage is primarily a diplomatic arrangement. I don't expect personal intimacy unless and until you're comfortable with the idea. We can be allies and partners without being lovers." His directness was startling, but also somewhat relieving. "That is considerate of you. I want you to feel safe here," he continued. "This is your home now, if you choose to make it one. But you're not a prisoner, and you're not a trophy. You're my wife and my partner, and I hope eventually my friend." Zarathel studied his face, looking for signs of deception or hidden agenda. She found none, which was somehow more unsettling than if she had. In her experience, everyone had hidden agendas. "Your father will expect regular reports on human capabilities and intentions," Marcus said casually. She stiffened. "How did you?" "Because that's what I would do in his position. It's perfectly reasonable." Marcus moved to a small table and poured himself something from a clear bottle. "Water," he offered. "Please." She accepted the glass, noting that his hands were completely steady. "You don't mind that I'll be reporting to the Emperor?" "Mind? I'm counting on it." Marcus's smile was enigmatic. "I want your father to understand exactly what humanity is capable of. It will make future negotiations much simpler." "You want him to know your capabilities?" "Most species try to hide their strengths." "Most species think like that." "Yes," Marcus agreed. "But humans learned long ago that sometimes the best way to avoid a fight is to make absolutely certain your potential opponent understands the consequences of starting one." They talked for another hour, carefully avoiding sensitive topics while slowly beginning to understand each other. Marcus proved to be intelligent, well-educated, and surprisingly thoughtful. He asked about her interests, her education, her hopes for the peace treaty. He spoke about Earth, about human culture, about his own background as both a diplomat and a soldier. When they finally retired to their separate sleeping chambers, another thoughtful touch that showed Marcus's consideration for her comfort. Zarathel lay awake for hours thinking about the day's events. She had married a human to secure peace between their species. It was supposed to be a simple political arrangement, with her role being primarily symbolic. But there was something about Marcus Chun that defied easy categorization. He was mild-mannered and courteous, yet her father's most feared admiral was dead by his hand. He was welcoming and accommodating, yet she sensed vast depths beneath his calm exterior. As she finally drifted off to sleep in her new home, Zarathel wondered if she had gotten herself into something far more complex than a simple marriage alliance. Time would tell if her growing curiosity about her husband would prove to be enlightening or dangerous. In a neighboring chamber, Marcus Chun lay equally awake, thinking about his new wife and the responsibilities that came with her. He had agreed to this marriage to secure peace for humanity, but he was already beginning to suspect that Princess Zarathel was going to prove far more interesting than either of their governments had anticipated. The real test would come when she began to understand what humans were truly capable of when pushed to their limits. For now, it was enough that she was safe, comfortable, and beginning to trust him. The rest would come in time. Outside their window, the stars wheeled silently through space, indifferent to the small dramas of the species that sailed between them. But if those stars could have spoken, they might have warned the Kethmoran Empire that humanity's greatest strength had never been their weapons or their technology. It had always been their ability to make the impossible seem inevitable. Zarathel awoke to unfamiliar sounds filtering through her chamber walls. Instead of the deep thrumming of imperial engines or the harsh barked orders of Kethmoran officers, she heard something that took her several moments to identify: laughter. Human laughter, accompanied by what seemed to be casual conversation. She rose from her sleeping platform and activated the room's environmental controls, adjusting the atmosphere to something closer to her home world's composition. The quarters Marcus had provided were more adaptable than she had expected, with systems sophisticated enough to accommodate various species' needs. A soft chime announced someone at her door. "Come in," she called, expecting to see Marcus. Instead, a human female entered carrying a tray of food and what appeared to be clothing. She was tall for her species, with short brown hair and a bearing that suggested military training, though she wore civilian clothes. "Good morning, Princess," the woman said with a respectful nod. "I'm Captain Sarah Chun, Marcus's sister. I thought you might appreciate some breakfast and perhaps a change of clothes. Your ceremonial garments are beautiful, but they don't look particularly comfortable for everyday wear." Zarathel blinked in surprise. The concept of family members serving in such a capacity was foreign to Kethmoran culture, where royal attendants were always servants or slaves. "You are his sister?" "Adopted sister, technically," Sarah clarified, setting the tray on a small table. "But family is family in human culture. Marcus asked me to help you get settled in while he attends to some administrative matters." "Administrative matters?" Sarah's expression grew slightly more serious. "News of the wedding has spread throughout human space. There are reactions that need to be managed. Nothing dangerous," she added quickly, seeing Zarathel's concern. "But some people are nervous about the implications of the alliance. Marcus is making sure everyone understands the situation correctly." Zarathel examined the food Sarah had brought. It was surprisingly appetizing, various fruits and proteins arranged in an aesthetically pleasing manner. The clothing was simple but well-made, sized appropriately for her larger frame. "This is very thoughtful," she said, "but I do not require personal service. I am capable of caring for myself." "I'm sure you are," Sarah agreed, "but accepting help from family is part of human social bonding. Besides, I wanted to meet the woman brave enough to marry my brother." "Brave?" Zarathel sampled one of the fruits, finding it sweet and refreshing. "I would hardly call an arranged marriage brave." Sarah sat down across from her, uninvited but somehow not presumptuous. "Maybe not the marriage itself, but choosing to leave everything familiar behind, to live among aliens who might not accept you, to trust people you've never met. that takes courage. I had little choice in the matter. There's always a choice, Sarah said quietly. You could have refused. You could have demanded the ceremony take place in Kethmoran's space, under your laws and customs. You could have insisted on bringing a full retinue of guards and advisors. Instead, you came here alone, trusting us to treat you with respect. That's either very brave or very foolish, and I prefer to think it's the former. Zarathel found herself studying this human woman more carefully. There was something in her manner that suggested hidden depths, much like her brother. You were a soldier, she observed. Still am, when necessary. But primarily I'm an engineer these days. I design defensive systems for human colonies. Defensive systems? Sarah nodded. Barriers, shields, fortifications. The kind of thing that helps people sleep safely at night. She paused, then added, Marcus mentioned you might be curious about human capabilities. If you're interested, I could show you some of our installations later. The offer surprised Zarathel. In Kethmoran culture, military secrets were closely guarded. The fact that these humans were willing to reveal their defensive strategies suggested either tremendous confidence or remarkable naivety. Why would you show me such things? Because understanding makes trust easier, Sarah replied. And because our defenses aren't really secret. Your father's intelligence services have probably already analyzed everything we've built in the outer colonies. The question is whether they understand what they're looking at. Before Zarathel could ask what that meant, Marcus appeared in the doorway. He had changed from his formal wedding attire into simple work clothes, but somehow managed to look no less impressive. If anything, the casual clothing made his underlying strength more apparent. I see Sarah has been taking good care of you, he said warmly. How are you adjusting to the accommodations? Very well, thank you. Your sister has been most helpful. She usually is, Marcus agreed, earning a mock scowl from Sarah. I was wondering if you might like to see more of the station today. And perhaps, he paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. Perhaps you'd like to observe some of our training exercises. I think you might find them educational. Zarathel felt a stir of genuine interest. Training exercises? Nothing elaborate, just routine drills. But they might help you understand some things about humanity that aren't immediately obvious. Within an hour, Zarathel found herself in an observation deck overlooking a large training facility. Below, dozens of humans were engaged in various activities, combat practice, equipment maintenance, coordination exercises. At first glance, it looked like standard military training that might be found on any civilized world. Then, she began to notice the details. The combat practice wasn't using training weapons or simulation equipment. The humans were fighting each other with what appeared to be full-force physical contact, using their bare hands and feet with devastating efficiency. What made it remarkable wasn't the violence. Kethmoran training was far more brutal, but the speed and precision with which they moved. They're not enhanced, she said suddenly, realizing what she was seeing. No, Marcus confirmed. No cybernetics, no genetic modifications, no chemical enhancements. What you're seeing is baseline human capability. A woman in the training area below executed a series of movements that would have challenged an Imperial Guard. She moved like liquid lightning, striking multiple opponents in rapid succession before they could react. When one of her sparring partners, a man nearly twice her size, tried to grapple with her, she used his own momentum to send him flying across the room. That should be impossible, Zarathel whispered. By Kethmoran standards, perhaps, Marcus said. But humans evolved differently than your people. We're persistence predators. We don't rely on natural weapons or overwhelming strength. We rely on endurance, adaptability, and what you might call creative problem-solving. Persistence predators? Sarah, who had joined them in the observation deck, explained. On Earth, humans were never the strongest or fastest species, but we could outlast anything. We would chase prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. We could survive in environments that killed other species. We learned to use tools, to work together, to adapt to any challenge. But that woman down there, Zarathel gestured toward the training floor. She's moving faster than the reaction time of most species. Reaction time can be trained, Marcus said simply. So can strength, endurance, pain tolerance, spatial awareness, and dozens of other capabilities. Humans have been pushing the boundaries of biological performance for thousands of years. The training session below shifted to equipment handling. Zarathel watched humans casually lifting and manipulating machinery that should have required mechanical assistance. Power armor that would have been too heavy for most species to wear was being donned and operated as if it weighed nothing. Your Admiral Krovek made a mistake, Marcus continued conversationally. He assumed that because humans look physically weak, we actually are physically weak. He never considered that appearance might be deceptive. Show her the stress test footage, Sarah suggested. Marcus activated a wall display, showing what appeared to be a laboratory setting. A human male was connected to various monitoring devices while performing increasingly difficult physical tasks. The readouts showed biological functions that seemed impossible. This is Dr. James Rodriguez, one of our researchers, Marcus explained. He volunteered for a comprehensive physiological study after we made first contact with your people. Watch his heart rate and brain activity during the stress tests. On screen, Dr. Rodriguez began with simple exercises, then progressed to activities that would have been challenging for enhanced soldiers. Throughout it all, his vital signs remained remarkably stable. More impressively, his brain activity showed patterns that suggested he was actually becoming calmer and more focused as the test became more difficult. Stress response, Sarah said. Most species experience degraded performance under pressure. Humans experience heightened performance. The more dangerous the situation, the more capable we become. This is what our intelligence reports call berserker rage, Zarathel said slowly. The ability to ignore pain and injury during combat. Berserker rage is just one aspect, Marcus corrected. Humans call it flow state or being in the zone. It's not just about ignoring pain. It's about accessing capabilities that aren't normally available. Enhanced reaction time, improved pattern recognition, increased strength and endurance, better coordination between mind and body. The implications were staggering. Zarathel had assumed humans were a typical developing species that had gotten lucky in a few battles against the Empire. The idea that their entire population possessed latent capabilities that rivaled military enhancement technology changed everything. How many humans can do this? She asked. All of them, Sarah replied matter-of-factly. With proper training and motivation, some are naturally better at it than others, but every human has the potential. That's impossible. Your population number's in the billions. You cannot all be warriors. Marcus smiled. We're not all warriors, but we're all survivors. There's a difference. The rest of the day passed in a blur of revelations. Marcus and Sarah showed her human settlements that had been built in environments that should have been uninhabitable. Cities on worlds with crushing gravity, extreme temperatures, or toxic atmospheres. In each case, humans had not only survived, but thrived, adapting their technology and themselves to master seemingly impossible conditions. They showed her historical records of human conflicts, where armies had overcome impossible odds through sheer determination and innovative tactics. They showed her scientific achievements that had solved problems other species had given up on centuries ago. But, most unsettling of all, they showed her the humans themselves. The cheerful engineer who casually mentioned surviving a hull breach by holding her breath for 12 minutes. The cook who had once fought off a pack of genetically modified predators using kitchen knives. The diplomat who spoke fluently in 17 languages, including several that required vocal cords humans weren't supposed to possess. Each individual human she met seemed pleasant, ordinary, unremarkable. Yet each carried stories of survival and achievement that would have been legendary among other species. You're beginning to understand, Marcus observed as they returned to their quarters that evening. I'm beginning to be terrified, Zarathel admitted. If humans are capable of such things, why have you not conquered the galaxy already? Marcus poured himself a cup of something that smelled like herbs and spices, because conquest was never our goal. We just want to be left alone to build our lives in peace. The only reason we've been fighting the Empire at all is because the Empire wouldn't leave us alone. But with capabilities like these, capabilities aren't the same as intentions, Marcus said firmly. Humans are capable of terrible things when pushed to extremes. But we prefer not to be pushed to extremes. That's why this alliance is so important. It gives both our species a chance to coexist without testing each other's limits. Zarathel sank into a chair, her mind reeling from everything she had learned. My father needs to know about this. Yes, he does, Marcus agreed. That's why I wanted you to see it. Your people have been thinking of humanity as a minor annoyance that could be dealt with through overwhelming force. That kind of thinking will get a lot of people killed on both sides. You could have simply told us. Would you have believed it without seeing the evidence yourself? She considered this. Probably not. Then, it was better to show you. Besides, Marcus added with a slight smile, I wanted my wife to understand what kind of species she had married into. It seemed only fair. The comment reminded Zarathel that this was supposed to be a marriage, not just a diplomatic mission. She studied Marcus's face, looking for some hint of his personal feelings about their arrangement. As usual, his expression was calm and unreadable. Are you disappointed that this is a political marriage? She found herself asking. The question seemed to catch him off guard. Disappointed? Why would I be disappointed? Because it prevents you from marrying someone you might actually care for. Someone of your own species. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, sipping his drink and staring out at the stars. I've never been particularly interested in romantic relationships, he finally said. I find companionship and intellectual partnership more appealing than passion. If anything, a political marriage suits me better than a conventional one might. That seems like a lonely way to live. Does it? I have friends, family, meaningful work, interesting challenges. What more does a person need? Zarathel didn't have an answer for that. In Kethmoran culture, marriage was primarily about alliance and reproduction, with personal affection being a pleasant bonus rather than a requirement. It's something in Marcus's tone suggested he had given up on something rather than simply never wanted it. What about children? She asked. Our species are compatible for reproduction, according to the medical reports. Do you want children? Do you? I hadn't really thought about it. Royal offspring are usually raised by professional caretakers rather than their parents. The personal relationship between parent and child is considered less important than proper education and training. Human children are usually raised by their parents, Marcus said. It's considered one of the most important relationships in a person's life. If we were to have children, I would want to be actively involved in raising them. The idea of a royal parent taking direct responsibility for child-rearing was almost shocking to Zarathel. Yet there was something appealing about it as well. That seems nice. We don't need to decide anything right now, Marcus assured her. We're still getting to know each other. There's time to figure out what kind of life we want to build together. That night, as Zarathel lay in her bed thinking about everything she had learned, she realized her situation had become far more complex than she had anticipated. She had married a human thinking she understood what that meant. Now she was beginning to suspect that neither she nor her father had any real idea what humanity was capable of. More troubling still, she was beginning to like Marcus Chun as a person, not just as a political ally. He was intelligent, considerate, and surprisingly thoughtful about her comfort and feelings. If the marriage alliance fell apart for political reasons, she would lose not just a diplomatic asset, but someone who was becoming a genuine friend. As sleep finally took her, Zarathel's last conscious thought was a question that would have horrified her father. What if the humans were right, and peace really was better than conquest? Outside her window, human civilization continued its quiet work of building, learning, and growing. And in the depths of space, Kethmoran fleets patrolled the borders of an empire that was about to discover that sometimes the most dangerous enemies were the ones who didn't want to fight at all 3 weeks after her wedding. Zarathel found herself in the most unlikely place imaginable. a human elementary school in the colony world of New Geneva. The children, small, energetic creatures who seemed to bounce rather than walk, had gathered around her with the fearless curiosity that apparently characterized young humans. "Are you really an alien princess?" a little girl with bright red hair asked, staring up at Zarathel with wide eyes. "I am Princess Zarathel of the Kethmoran Empire," she confirmed, crouching down to be closer to the child's eye level. "Do you have magic powers?" a boy wanted to know. "Not magic, no. But my people can do some things that might seem magical to humans." To demonstrate, she allowed her skin to shift through several color patterns, from deep silver to brilliant gold to soft blue. The children gasped in delight, reaching out to touch her arms and watch the colors flow beneath their small fingers. Marcus, who had been speaking with the teacher, joined the group with an amused smile. "I see you've discovered one of humanity's most dangerous weapons," he said to Zarathel. "Dangerous weapons?" "Children," he clarified. "They have an almost supernatural ability to make even the most hardened individuals fall completely in love with them." As if to prove his point, the red-haired girl had somehow wound up in Zarathel's lap, chattering away about her pet cat, and her drawing of what she claimed was a spaceship but looked more like a colorful blob. Zarathel found herself listening with genuine interest, surprised by how engaging the child's simple observations could be. "Why did you bring me here?" she asked Marcus, quietly while the children showed off their artwork. "Because I wanted you to see what we're actually fighting for," he replied. "Not territory or resources or political power. The chance for children to grow up safe and happy and free to be curious about the universe." The visit had been Marcus's idea, part of what he called a cultural exchange tour of human settlements. Over the past weeks, they had visited research stations, agricultural colonies, manufacturing centers, and artistic communities. Each stop had revealed new aspects of human civilization that didn't fit with Zarathel's preconceptions. She had expected to find a militaristic society organized around conquest and expansion, similar to the Kethmoran Empire. Instead, she found communities focused on building, learning, creating, and, above all, taking care of each other. The humans she met were certainly capable of violence when necessary, but it wasn't their defining characteristic. "Teacher Sarah says you're married to Mr. Marcus," one of the children announced. "Are you going to have babies?" Zarathel felt her skin flush silver with embarrassment while Marcus chuckled. "That's a very personal question, Tommy. But if you do have babies, will they be half alien?" "They would be half human and half Kethmoran," Zarathel explained patiently. "They would belong to both peoples." "That would be so cool," several children exclaimed at once. The innocent enthusiasm of the children was both heartwarming and unsettling. They saw no contradiction in the idea of hybrid offspring, no concern about cultural conflicts or political complications. To them, it was simply interesting. Their teacher, a middle-aged woman named Janet Morrison, approached with a datapad. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's an urgent message for you, Mr. Chun." Marcus's expression immediately became more serious as he reviewed the message. "We need to return to Luna Station immediately," he told Zarathel. "There's been a development." The flight back to Luna Station was tense and silent. Marcus spent the entire journey reviewing intelligence reports and communicating with various officials through encrypted channels. When Zarathel tried to ask what was happening, he simply said, "Your father's fleet has moved position." That simple statement sent ice through her veins. In Kethmoran military doctrine, fleet movements were always preludes to action. Either her father was preparing to attack something, or he was responding to a perceived threat. At Luna Station, they were met by Admiral Lisa Zhang, the commanding officer of Earth's defensive forces. She was a compact, intense woman who somehow managed to look both exhausted and alert at the same time. "The Kethmoran Third Fleet has taken position at the edge of the Centauri system," she reported without preamble. "Intelligence suggests they're conducting training exercises, but the formations are consistent with preparation for a strike." "Strike on what?" Marcus asked. Unknown. Could be Centauri itself, could be Earth, could be one of the outer colonies. Or it could actually be training exercises designed to test our response times. Zarathel studied the tactical displays showing the fleet positions. She recognized the formations. This was her father's way of applying pressure without technically violating the peace treaty. The Empire wasn't attacking, but they were making it clear they could attack at any time. This is because of me, she realized. He wants to see how humans will react to provocation. That's our assessment as well, Admiral Zhang agreed. The question is how we should respond. Do we mobilize our own fleets, potentially escalating the situation? Do we ignore it and risk appearing weak? Or do we try to communicate directly with Emperor Vextar? I could contact him, Zarathel offered, as his daughter and your ally. I might be able to determine his true intentions. Marcus and Admiral Zhang exchanged glances. That might not be advisable, Marcus said carefully. If this is a test of your loyalty, as well as our capabilities, contacting him directly could be seen as a sign that the marriage alliance isn't working. Then what do you suggest? Admiral Zhang activated a new display showing the positions of human forces. We have 3 options. First, we mobilize our defensive fleets and mirror the Kethmoran positioning, showing that we're prepared for battle, but not seeking it. Second, we ignore the fleet movements entirely and continue with normal operations, demonstrating that we're not intimidated. Third, Marcus prompted. Third, we show them exactly what human capabilities look like when we're not trying to avoid a fight. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Zarathel felt her hearts racing as she considered the implications. What does that mean exactly, she asked. Admiral Zhang's smile was not entirely pleasant. It means we stop hiding what humanity can do when we're properly motivated. Over the next several hours, Zarathel watched in growing amazement as human civilization transformed itself with terrifying efficiency. What had appeared to be peaceful colonies and research stations revealed themselves to be something else entirely. The agricultural colony on Demeter turned out to be growing food for massive underground military installations. The research station in the Alpha Centauri system was actually a weapons development facility that had been working on projects that made Imperial technology look primitive. The manufacturing center on Vulcan was producing warships disguised as civilian transports. Most shocking of all, the humans themselves changed. The pleasant, peaceful people she had been meeting for weeks revealed hidden depths of coordination and purpose that spoke of extensive military training. Scientists became weapons specialists. Teachers became tactical advisors. Artists became intelligence analysts. How long have you been preparing for war? She asked Marcus as they stood in Luna Station's command center, watching reports flow in from across human space. Since the day we made first contact with your people, he replied. We hoped for peace, but we prepared for war. It's the human way. But the children will be protected, Marcus assured her. That's why we prepare. Not because we want to fight, but because we want to make sure fighting is never necessary. The command center was a marvel of efficiency. Information flowed seamlessly between dozens of human worlds, creating a real-time picture of everything happening within hundreds of light years. What struck Zarathel most was the complete lack of panic or chaos. The humans were responding to a potential crisis with the calm professionalism of a species that had faced existential threats before and survived. Admiral Zhang, one of the communications officers, called out, We're receiving a priority transmission from the Kethmoran flagship. On screen, Zhang ordered. Emperor Vextar's massive form filled the main display, his 4 arms clasped behind his back in the formal position he adopted for official communications. His expression was unreadable, which in itself was significant. Zarathel had learned to interpret her father's moods from subtle changes in posture and coloration. Admiral Zhang, the Emperor said formally, I trust my daughter as well. Princess Zarathel is perfectly safe and comfortable, Your Majesty, Zhang replied with equal formality. Excellent. I find myself curious about human defensive capabilities. My fleet is conducting training exercises in the Centauri system. Perhaps your forces would like to observe. It was both an invitation and a challenge. Zarathel held her breath, waiting to see how the humans would respond. We would be honored to observe Kethmoran tactical exercises, Zhang replied smoothly. And perhaps you would be interested in observing some of our own training activities. Indeed. What sort of training activities? Zhang gestured, and a tactical display appeared showing human fleet positions throughout the local sector. What it revealed made Zarathel's breath catch in her throat. There weren't just defensive fleets protecting human worlds. There were hunter-killer squadrons positioned to intercept any attack routes toward Earth. There were stealth reconnaissance units that had apparently been monitoring Kethmoran fleet movements for weeks without being detected. There were what appeared to be mobile fortress platforms that could respond to threats anywhere in human space within hours. Most ominously, there were formations that she couldn't immediately identify, positioned in deep space between human territory and the Empire's borders. We call them fleet trials, Zhang explained conversationally. Exercises designed to test our force's ability to respond to various scenarios. Emperor Vextar studied the display for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried a note that Zarathel recognized as genuine curiosity rather than his usual commanding tone. Your defensive preparations are more extensive than our intelligence suggested. Defensive preparations are always visible to careful observation, Zhang agreed. It's our offensive preparations that tend to be more subtle. Show me. What followed was the most terrifying display of military capability Zarathel had ever witnessed. The unknown formations in deep space revealed themselves to be human dreadnoughts, massive ships that had somehow avoided detection by Imperial sensors. Weapons platforms that had been disguised as asteroid mining operations activated to demonstrate their true function. Entire star systems that appeared to be empty space turned out to be riddled with defensive installations and mobile weapon platforms. But the most shocking revelation came when Admiral Zhang activated what she called the Damocles Protocol. Throughout human space, civilian ships began transforming. Cargo haulers revealed themselves to be armed transports. Passenger liners deployed weapon systems that rivaled military cruisers. Even the small personal craft that humans used for local transportation turned out to be capable of combat operations. Every human ship is a potential warship, Zhang explained calmly. Every human colony is a potential fortress. Every human citizen is a potential soldier. We learned long ago that the best way to preserve peace is to make war too costly to contemplate. The silence that followed was deafening. Emperor Vextar stared at the displays, showing the true scope of human military capability, his expression shifting through several emotions that Zarathel couldn't quite interpret. You have been preparing for war with the Empire, he said finally. We have been preparing to survive contact with the Empire, Zhang corrected. There's a difference. And if the Empire chose to test these preparations, Admiral Zhang's expression didn't change, but something in her voice made Zarathel step closer to Marcus. Then, the Empire would discover that humans are very good at learning from their enemies. We've studied Kethmoran tactics, analyzed Kethmoran technology, and developed countermeasures for Kethmoran advantages. We know how you fight, Your Majesty. The question is whether you know how we fight. Marcus stepped forward, moving into the camera's field of view. Your Majesty, if I may. This display wasn't intended as a threat, but as an explanation. Humanity doesn't want war with the Kethmoran Empire, but we won't be conquered by it either. The marriage alliance between Princess Zarathel and myself represents a choice between two futures, one where our peoples coexist in peace, and one where we test each other's limits in ways that benefit no one. Emperor Vextar's attention shifted to his daughter. Zarathel, you have been living among these humans for weeks. What is your assessment? Zarathel felt the weight of both civilizations resting on her response. Everything she said would be analyzed, interpreted, and used to guide policy decisions that could affect billions of lives. "Father," she said carefully, "I have learned that humanity is not what we assumed them to be. They're not a primitive species that got lucky in a few battles. They are not a weak civilization that can be easily dominated. They are survivors who have turned survival into an art form." Explain. They don't fight the way we fight. They don't think the way we think. They prepare for every possibility, adapt to any challenge, and turn every disadvantage into an advantage. If the Empire goes to war with humanity, we will win some battles. We might even win most battles. But we will not win the war, because humans don't know how to lose a war they believe is necessary. The Emperor was quiet for a long time, studying his daughter's face through the communication link. "And you believe peace is possible?" "I believe peace is the only intelligent option," she replied firmly. "For both our peoples." Another long silence. Then, Emperor Vextar's expression shifted into what Zarathel recognized as approval. "Very well. The Third Fleet will return to Imperial space. Admiral Zhang, I trust you will likewise withdraw your fleet trials to defensive positions." "Of course, Your Majesty." "And perhaps," the Emperor continued, "it will be beneficial for Imperial and human forces to conduct some joint training exercises, to better understand each other's capabilities and limitations." Admiral Zhang's smile was genuine for the first time since the crisis began. "We would welcome such an opportunity." After the communication ended, the command center gradually returned to normal operations. The crisis had passed without a single shot being fired, but Zarathel felt as though she had witnessed something far more significant than a military standoff. "Your father is a wise leader," Marcus said quietly. "He recognized the situation for what it was and chose the path that benefits everyone." "As did you," Zarathel replied. "You could have hidden your true capabilities, let the Empire underestimate humanity until it was too late. That would have led to unnecessary deaths on both sides. Better to be clear about the consequences of aggression before anyone commits to a course they can't reverse." As they walked back to their quarters, Zarathel found herself thinking about the children she had met on New Geneva, so eager to learn about the universe, and so confident that it was a good and safe place. The adults who protected them had been willing to reveal their most closely guarded secrets to prevent a war that might have shattered that innocence. "Marcus," she said as they reached their door, "when I spoke to my father, I said that humans don't know how to lose a war they believe is necessary. Was I correct?" Marcus paused with his hand on the door control. "Yes," he said simply. "We don't. What makes a war necessary from humanity's perspective? Protecting our children. Protecting our freedom to choose our own path. Protecting our right to exist as we choose to exist." He looked at her directly. A war to prevent those things would be very necessary indeed. That night, Zarathel sent a detailed report to her father's intelligence services, describing everything she had learned about human capabilities and intentions. But she also sent a personal message, encrypted with codes known only to immediate family members. In it, she told them about the children of New Geneva, about the teachers and engineers and artists who could transform into soldiers when necessary, but preferred to remain teachers and engineers and artists. She told them about a civilization that had turned the arts of peace and the arts of war into the same thing, the art of survival. Most importantly, she told them that humanity wasn't humanity's greatest strength. Humanity's greatest strength was that they had never forgotten what they were fighting for. As the message transmitted across the vast distances between stars, Zarathel lay in her bed, thinking about the future her marriage might help create. A future where Kethmoran children and human children could grow up together, learning from each other's strengths and compensating for each other's weaknesses. It was a good future. It was worth fighting for. 2 months into their marriage, Zarathel discovered that Marcus Chun was not just a diplomat and soldier. He was also an excellent cook. She found him in their quarters' small kitchen area, preparing what appeared to be a complex meal involving ingredients from both Earth and several human colony worlds. I didn't know cooking was part of diplomatic training, she commented, settling into a chair where she could watch him work. It's not, Marcus replied, deftly slicing vegetables with movements that reminded her uncomfortably of weapon handling techniques. But I enjoy it. There's something meditative about creating something nourishing from raw ingredients. And the skill with knives? Marcus glanced at her with amusement. You've noticed that everything humans do seems to have military applications? It's becoming difficult to ignore. Knife work is knife work, whether you're preparing food or preparing for combat. The principles are the same: precision, efficiency, awareness of your tools and materials. He set down the knife and activated what appeared to be some sort of heating element. Besides, a person who can't feed themselves is vulnerable in ways that have nothing to do with external enemies. As if summoned by the aroma of cooking food, Sarah Chan arrived carrying a bottle of wine and wearing an expression that Zarathel had learned to associate with important news. I bring gifts and gossip, Sarah announced, setting the bottle on the counter. The gifts are obvious. The gossip is that the first joint training exercise between Imperial and human forces has been approved. When? Marcus asked, not looking up from his cooking. Next month. 3 Imperial battle groups and 2 human fleet divisions. The exercise will take place in a neutral system at coordinates. Sarah rattled off a string of numbers that meant nothing to Zarathel, but caused Marcus to nod approvingly. Far enough from both territories to avoid misunderstandings, close enough to both for rapid response if something goes wrong, he mused. Whose idea was the joint exercise? Officially, the diplomatic corps on both sides, seeking to build mutual understanding and cooperation. Sarah's smile was sardonic. Unofficially, your father-in-law wants to see how human forces perform in actual combat conditions, and our Admiralty wants to test Keth Moran capabilities without starting a war. Zarathel felt a familiar chill. Combat condition. The exercise scenario involves a hypothetical pirate fleet attacking a joint human Keth Moran colony, Sarah explained. Both sides will need to coordinate their response while dealing with an aggressive, unpredictable enemy. Except the pirates will actually be drone ships controlled by both sides' military computers, Marcus added. Programmed to fight like actual pirates, but without the risk of casualties among friendlies. That seems elaborate. The best training always is, Marcus said. You can't prepare for real combat with simple exercises. The scenario needs to be complex enough to challenge both sides' tactical flexibility. As they shared the meal Marcus had prepared, which was indeed excellent, Zarathel found herself thinking about the implications of the joint exercise. It would be the first time Imperial and human forces had worked together rather than against each other. Success could pave the way for further cooperation. Failure could shatter the fragile peace they had all worked to build. I want to observe the exercise, she said suddenly. Are you sure? Marcus asked. It might be intense. Military exercises between former enemies tend to bring out competitive instincts that aren't always pleasant to watch. I need to see how our peoples work together when faced with a common challenge. Sarah and Marcus exchanged one of their meaningful looks. There's something else you should know, Sarah said carefully. The exercise isn't just about testing military coordination. What do you mean? Marcus set down his fork and looked directly at Zarathel. There are factions on both sides that oppose the peace treaty. Some imperial nobles believe humanity should be conquered rather than treated as equals. Some human leaders believe the Keth Moran Empire can never be trusted. This exercise is as much about proving those factions wrong as it is about building military cooperation. The implications were sobering. And if the exercise fails, then those factions gain influence, and the peace treaty becomes much harder to maintain, Sarah said bluntly. No pressure. 3 weeks later, Zarathel stood on the bridge of the human flagship Endurance, watching the most complex military exercise in galactic history unfold before her. The combined fleet consisted of 47 ships from both civilizations, commanded by Admiral Zhang for the humans and Admiral Krodan, the late Admiral Krovek's replacement, for the Empire. The sight of Imperial and human ships operating in formation should have been inspiring. Instead, Zarathel found it nerve-wracking. The two fleets maintained careful separation, their movements precise, but lacking the fluid coordination that characterized effective military units. First day nerves, Marcus explained, noting her expression. He was serving as a diplomatic observer alongside her, though she suspected his role was more significant than the title suggested. Both sides are being extra careful not to accidentally trigger an incident. They look like they're afraid of each other. They are. Fear can be healthy when it promotes caution, but it becomes a problem when it prevents necessary cooperation. On the main display, the exercise scenario was beginning. The pirate fleet, 20 heavily armed drones programmed with aggressive but realistic tactical patterns, had appeared at the edge of the system and was moving toward the hypothetical colony world that the combined fleet was meant to protect. Admiral Zhang's voice cut through the bridge communications. Imperial Command, this is Human Command. Enemy forces detected bearing 27 Mark 5. Recommand coordinated intercept formation. Human Command, this is Imperial Command. Admiral Crodan's response was formal and careful. Concur with intercept recommendation. Imperial forces will take point formation, human forces in support. Marcus winced slightly. Traditional Keth Moran tactics, he murmured to Zarathel. Direct assault with overwhelming force. It'll work against the pirates, but it's not taking advantage of human capabilities. We fight differently than your people do. The initial engagement went exactly as Marcus had predicted. The Imperial forces charged directly at the pirate fleet, relying on superior firepower and armor to smash through enemy formations. The human ships provided long-range support, picking off targets that the Imperial assault missed. It was effective, but it was also wasteful. The pirates managed to inflict more damage than they should have, because the combined fleet was fighting like two separate forces rather than one integrated unit. This isn't working. Admiral Zhang's voice carried frustration despite her professional tone. Imperial Command, request permission to implement alternate tactical approach. Specify alternate approach, Admiral Crodan replied cautiously. Distributed engagement pattern. Human forces provide mobility and reconnaissance while Imperial forces provide heavy assault capability. Combined arms approach rather than linear formation. A long pause. Zarathel could practically feel the tension between the two command structures. Approved for trial, Admiral Crodan said finally. Imperial forces will adapt to human tactical recommendations. What followed was a masterclass in how different military philosophies could complement each other. The human ships, smaller, faster, and more maneuverable than their Imperial counterparts, began operating as scouts and harassment units. They would identify weak points in enemy formations and create openings that the heavier Imperial ships could exploit. The Imperial vessels, with their massive firepower and virtually impregnable armor, became mobile fortresses around which human forces could operate. When pirates tried to overwhelm human ships with numbers, they found themselves facing Imperial dreadnoughts. When they tried to stand and fight the Imperial ships, human vessels struck from unexpected angles. Now that's what cooperation looks like, Marcus said with satisfaction as the combined fleet began systematically dismantling the pirate forces. But just as it seemed the exercise was going perfectly, everything went wrong. Admiral, one of the Endurance's sensor operators called out. We're detecting additional contacts. Multiple ships dropping out of hyperspace at coordinates 48 Mark 12. The main display shifted to show the new arrivals. 12 ships, flying no recognizable flags, moving in formation toward the exercise area. Those aren't part of the exercise, Admiral Zhang said grimly. All ships, yellow alert. Unknown contacts approaching our position. Admiral Crodan's voice was equally tense. Human Command, Imperial sensors indicate unknown ships are armed and displaying aggressive postures. Marcus was suddenly At one of the communication stations, his diplomatic demeanor replaced by something much more focused and dangerous. All stations, this is Diplomatic Observer Chun. I need real-time analysis of the unknown contacts. Configuration, armament, probable origin. Marcus, Zarathel said urgently. What's happening? I'm not sure yet, but someone doesn't want this exercise to succeed. The unknown ships were closing fast, and they weren't responding to communication attempts from either fleet. Worse, their formation and approach vectors suggested they were preparing to attack the combined fleet. All ships, red alert. Admiral Zhang's voice cut across all channels. Unknown contacts are showing hostile intent. All units prepare for combat. Imperial Command confirms hostile intent, Admiral Crodan added. Imperial forces moving to intercept. What followed was chaos. The unknown attackers, who were definitely not drones, struck the combined fleet with weapons that seemed designed specifically to counter both human and Imperial defenses. They used Imperial-style heavy weapons against the human ships and human-style mobility tactics against the Imperial vessels. Someone's been studying both our technologies, Marcus said grimly, watching the tactical display. These ships know exactly how to fight us. Pirates? Zarathel asked hopefully. No, pirates use whatever weapons they can steal or buy. This is too coordinated, too specifically designed. Marcus's expression was grim. Someone wants to make it look like humans and Kethmarans can't work together effectively. The battle was not going well. The combined fleet was still operating as two separate entities rather than a truly integrated force. The attackers were exploiting every gap in coordination, every hesitation between command structures. Then, Admiral Zhang made a decision that changed everything. Imperial Command, this is Admiral Zhang, requesting permission to implement Emergency Protocol 77 Alpha. Specify Protocol 77 Alpha, Admiral Crodan replied. Combined command structure. One tactical coordinator for all forces, Imperial and human. Maximum efficiency, minimum communication delays. Another pause. Zarathel held her breath, knowing that Admiral Crodan was being asked to place Imperial forces under potentially human command during active combat. Permission granted, Admiral Crodan said finally. Imperial forces acknowledge combined command authority. Admiral Crodan will assume overall tactical command, Admiral Zhang announced immediately. Human forces acknowledge Imperial command authority. All units, prepare to receive new orders. The speed of the command transition was breathtaking. Within minutes, the combined fleet transformed from two separate entities into a single, coordinated fighting force. Human ships began providing reconnaissance and mobility, while Imperial ships delivered devastating firepower. But now the coordination was seamless. The attackers, who had been winning through superior tactics, suddenly found themselves facing an enemy that combined the best aspects of both military traditions. Human flexibility and innovation merged with Imperial power and endurance to create something neither force could have achieved alone. The battle was over within an hour. The attacking ships were either destroyed or had fled, leaving behind only debris and unanswered questions. All ships, stand down from red alert. Admiral Crodan's voice carried across the fleet. Begin recovery operations and damage assessment. Imperial Command, this is Admiral Zhang. Outstanding tactical coordination. Human forces are honored to have served under Imperial Command. Human Command, this is Admiral Crodan. Imperial forces are equally honored to have served alongside human forces. Combined operations proved highly effective. As the immediate crisis passed, Zarathel found herself thinking about what she had witnessed. The two fleets had been struggling to work together during the exercise, but when faced with a real threat, they had merged into a single, devastatingly effective fighting force. "Who do you think attacked us?" she asked Marcus as they reviewed the tactical reports. "I have suspicions, but no proof," Marcus replied. "The important thing is how our people responded. When it mattered, they chose cooperation over competition." The fleet coordination was remarkable. It was. But that's not the most significant thing that happened here. What do you mean? Marcus gestured toward the communications display, where messages were flowing between Imperial and human ships. Listen to the language. They're not talking about Imperial forces and human forces anymore. They're talking about our ships and our people. The psychological barrier has been broken. Zarathel listened to the communications traffic and realized Marcus was right. Somewhere during the crisis, the two fleets had stopped thinking of each other as allies of convenience and started thinking of each other as partners in a common cause. This will change everything, she said. Yes, it will. The factions that oppose the peace treaty just lost their strongest argument. It's hard to claim that humans and Kethmarans can't work together when they just did so in the most challenging circumstances possible. The journey back to Luna Station was markedly different from the tense voyage out. Human and Imperial crews were exchanging technical information, sharing tactical innovations, and even socializing during off-duty hours. The barriers that had seemed insurmountable just weeks ago were dissolving with surprising speed. Your people adapt quickly, Zarathel observed to Marcus as they watched Imperial and human engineers working together to repair battle damage. So do yours, he replied. That's what made the cooperation possible. Both our species are capable of learning and changing when circumstances require it. Do you think the attackers accomplished what they intended? Marcus smiled. If their intention was to prove that humans and Kethmarans can't work together, then they failed spectacularly. If their intention was to force us to work together more closely than either side had planned, he shrugged. Then, I suppose they succeeded. That evening, in their quarters aboard the Endurance, Zarathel and Marcus reviewed the day's events while sharing a bottle of wine that Sarah had given them. I've been thinking about something, Zarathel said. When Admiral Zhang offered to place human forces under Imperial command, and when Admiral Krodan accepted combined operations, they were taking enormous risks. If the cooperation had failed, both of their careers would have been over, Marcus agreed. But they did it anyway because they recognized that success was more important than personal safety. That level of trust, it's not something that can be ordered or negotiated. It has to be earned. And now it has been, Marcus said. The foundation for Real partnership has been laid. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars through their viewport and thinking about the day's events. Marcus, Zarathel said eventually, I want you to know that this marriage, it's become something more than a political arrangement for me. For me as well, he replied quietly. I find myself genuinely caring about you as a person, not just as a representative of your species. The feeling is mutual. She turned to look at him directly. What happens if the peace treaty fails despite everything we've accomplished? What happens to us? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. I suppose that depends on us, he said finally. Political alliances may come and go, but personal relationships are what we make them. You would choose me over humanity if it came to that choice. I would choose to find a way to avoid having to make that choice, Marcus said diplomatically. But if such a situation arose, yes, I would choose you. The simple statement carried more weight than any formal declaration. Zarathel felt something inside her chest that might have been one of her hearts skipping a beat. Even though I'm alien? Especially because you're alien, Marcus replied with a slight smile. You've shown me ways of thinking and being that I never would have discovered otherwise. You made me a better person. Ow! You've taught me that strength doesn't have to mean dominance, that honor doesn't require conquest, and that love doesn't have to be between members of the same species. The word love hung in the air between them, like a bridge neither had expected to build, but both were willing to cross. Love, Zarathel asked softly. Love, Marcus confirmed. Is that acceptable to you? Instead of answering with words, Zarathel closed the distance between them and kissed him, the first truly intimate gesture they had shared since their wedding. It was, she reflected as their relationship moved into uncharted territory, a much better foundation for marriage than either of their governments had probably intended. Outside their viewport, the combined fleet continued its journey home, carrying with it the seeds of a partnership that would reshape the galaxy. And, in their quarters, two people who had begun as strangers bound by duty discovered that sometimes the most powerful alliances were the ones that grew from something as simple as choosing to trust each other. The peace between their species was no longer just a political arrangement. It had become personal. 6 months after their wedding, Zarathel stood in the medical bay of Luna Station, staring at a display that showed 2 heartbeats where she had expected to find one. The human doctor, Dr. Elena Vasquez, was smiling as she pointed to the ultrasound image. "Congratulations, princess. You're pregnant with twins." The news hit Zarathel like a physical blow. She had known pregnancy was possible. The medical compatibility tests had been thorough, but the reality of carrying hybrid children felt overwhelming. "Is this normal?" she asked weakly. "For human Kethmoran pregnancies? We don't have enough data to define normal yet," Dr. Vasquez admitted. "But everything looks healthy. The babies are developing well, and your body is adapting beautifully to the changes." Marcus, who had been unusually quiet during the examination, finally spoke. "How are you feeling about this?" he asked Zarathel. "Terrified," she answered honestly. "Excited, confused, honored, all at the same time." The pregnancy announcement sent ripples through both civilizations. Among humans, there was fascination with the scientific implications and genuine excitement about the first hybrid children. Among the Kethmoran Empire, reactions were more complex. Some nobles saw it as validation of the alliance, while others viewed it as contamination of the royal bloodline. Emperor Vextar's response, when it came, was characteristically direct. "The children will be raised as heirs to both cultures. They will understand their dual heritage and the responsibilities that come with it." The statement was both a blessing and a burden. These children would grow up knowing that their very existence was political as well as personal. As Zarathel's pregnancy progressed, she found herself experiencing humanity in ways she never could have anticipated. Human pregnancy customs included elaborate rituals called baby showers, where friends and family provided gifts and advice. She was touched when Sarah Chun organized one for her, inviting human and Kethmoran women to celebrate together. "This is unprecedented," commented Ambassador Thelvara, one of the Kethmoran diplomats stationed on Luna. "Royal pregnancies are typically private affairs handled by medical professionals and palace staff. Humans treat pregnancy as a community celebration," Sarah explained. "Everyone shares in the joy and responsibility of welcoming new life." Watching human and Kethmoran women comparing parenting experiences and debating the merits of different child-rearing practices, Zarathel began to see how her children might grow up with the best of both cultures. But the most profound change came in her relationship with Marcus. The pregnancy seemed to unlock something in both of them, a depth of emotional connection that neither had expected. "I've been thinking about names," Marcus said one evening as they sat together in their expanded quarters. Zarathel was now large enough that simple tasks required careful planning, and Marcus had become remarkably attentive to her needs. "Names are important in both our cultures," Zarathel agreed. "They carry meaning and heritage. What if we chose names that honor both traditions? One name from each culture for each child." They spent hours researching names, learning about the linguistic and cultural significance of various choices. It became a way of exploring their combined heritage and imagining what kind of people their children might become. "Alexander Kethmoran Chun," Marcus suggested. "After Alexander the Great for the human tradition, Kethmoran for your people." "And Arya Vexthel Chun," Zarathel added. "Arya means song in ancient human language. Vexthel honors my father's lineage." The names felt right, bridges between worlds, just as their children would be.